So a lot of what I'm seeing coming out of this world of philosophy and religion and metaphysics is that behind what look like scientific arguments and really impassioned defenses of, in this case, a sort of etiology of long COVID, but in my other work, dietary interventions or certain kinds of medical treatments, what's operative in the background is a metaphysics that people feel very strongly about and need to be able to defend using whatever the most powerful rhetoric is of the day, which right now is science and quantifiable research.
Yeah. So in your book, Natural, that came out in 2020. Walk us through that. What prompted that and kind of what is the argument of the book?
Really simply, as I was working on dietary stuff for the book before that, looking at non-celiac gluten sensitivity, just looking at people's dietary patterns in general, also looking at pseudoscience. So I would run into people trying to heal their cancer with dietary interventions and that sort of thing, and then dying if they also abandoned chemo and surgery. What I saw was the word natural came up all the time. People say what you should do is eat naturally. And that was used, though, always to defend whatever it was that they wanted to eat. So vegetarians would often say, that's the natural diet of humans. And this goes back historically for centuries. And I started to realize that what natural was a stand-in, a kind of scientific sounding or secular, non-religious stand-in for holy or pure. And what nature was a scientific or secular stand-in for an all-powerful organizing force that's on our side. And if we align with nature, then we will be healthy and happy. And if we don't align with nature, then that explains all of our suffering. And so what I do in Natural is I show how that plays out in so many contexts, not just health, but in economic theories. We should use natural markets, for example, this idea that somehow there's a force that organizes everything harmoniously if only we didn't interfere with it.
Yeah. Where else did you see it? So I think you see it a lot in diet. I mean, I think like clean eating, that's clearly there's some implication of natural. Where else have you seen it in the health realm?
Oh my gosh. Where does it not crop up? So childbirth is a really good example. And actually, let me zoom in on childbirth, because I think I went into this really cynical about naturalness. Why are people so into natural? Yeah. But when I interviewed many, many mothers who had opted for natural childbirth, they would start by giving scientific reasons. So they'd talk about, dangers in hospitals or bonding with the child or whatever, you name it. And they would cite studies because that's the currency of truth right now. But when I continued to talk with them, they would say things like, well, also I wanted to be at home. I wanted to feel in control of my birth. I didn't want to give birth in some sort of hospital where it feels like there's nothing special or holy about this ritual of giving birth. And I was like, wow, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. The problem is that in order to justify choices like I wanted to do something that feels beautiful or feels sacred to me, because those sorts of values aren't allowed in the kind of public square, people kept having to shift naturalness into a kind of scientific argument. So I think part of the problem actually is that people want to do things because it makes them feel freer, or it makes them feel more empowered, or they think it's beautiful. And because that kind of argument is sort of disallowed or is weaker than scientific arguments, they end up shifting to, well, look at this study that says natural births are better, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I also see it in sports too, right? So naturalness is a really important part of sports. So I talk about that a lot. And that actually makes a lot of sense. We want our athletes to be natural. Why? Because otherwise people would be winning the sprint using a motorcycle. I mean, it's like, so sports itself is actually built around a kind of messy but important conception of naturalness.
Yeah.
Those are two examples.
What are some examples in the diet world? I feel like those are the things that people probably will see the most often.
Carnivore diet. People will often say that what humans should naturally eat, the natural ideal diet, is all meat. And they'll point to how indigenous Alaskans or something would, when given the choice, opt always for organ meat or marrow or something like that. Or they will talk about how the low carb diet is a natural diet. And then what people do when they make these arguments is actually very religious. They say back in the day, when people hadn't been corrupted by modernity, here's what they ate. So they use semi-nomadic or nomadic hunter-gatherers as the stand-in for Eden. And then they take their diet, whether it's the carnivore diet or the vegetarian diet or whatever it is, they backfit it. In general, the same true for organic food. So organic is just sort of, kissing cousins with natural. And they say, well, back in the day when people didn't get sick, there weren't any inorganic foods or there weren't GMOs or whatever. So GMOs, another really good example of that. And interestingly, again, to focus a bit, I know it's a long answer on GMOs in the diet world. I think part of what's going on is also religious, which is that genetic engineering is seen as playing God. And what I actually don't get to talk about in the book, but which is really important, is the same kind of resistance to nuclear energy happens as well. So in the naturalness world, there's this idea that if we're splitting atoms or engineering genetics, we're playing God, and that's necessarily wrong and therefore extremely dangerous. And so you get real problems with the actual ability to assess, which foods are actually dangerous for us. There are obviously processed foods that are extremely bad for our health for a variety of reasons. There are forms of energy that are really bad. But once you have that kind of religious/metaphysical framework in the background, it can be very difficult to actually talk about what's driving people's arguments.
Yeah. What other elements I'll use the term religious, do you see in the health world? As you were talking, I was thinking even like there's almost a rise of kind of gurus, we call them in the health world. And that's like a term taken specifically from religion.
Yeah, totally. It's funny, looking at the history of this, I spent a lot of time looking at the history, especially of dietary things, but now also health trends in general. People, you would be shocked, or people who aren't familiar with this history. There was this guy, Horace Fletcher. He was popular in the early to mid 20th century, the great masticator. So his theory was that you were supposed to chew food, I forget exactly, 100 times, 200 times before you swallowed it. And he would mail envelopes of his shit to people, and he would say, look, my shit doesn't stink. That's what he would say, because I chew my food like this. Can you imagine this? He would go to colleges. He would do strength competitions with people. He'd be like, they're famous. He bested Yale athletes in a strength competition. He was this older guy. The same kind of things you see today, right? This is the RFK Jr. sort of approach. Do a bunch of shirtless push-ups with Kid Rock to prove that whatever your preferred health, intervention is the right one. And people loved it. People loved the great masticator. Everyone was chewing their food 100 times. All these celebrities, Rockefeller, authors, Henry James, I think. I forget exactly who, but you see the same thing again and again and again. And to tie this back a little bit to the Wired piece, understandably, a lot of people in this world see the sorts of people that I highlighted, the brain retraining clinicians, as just another set of snake oil gurus. And to be fair, some of them are, and they have that kind of charisma. They have that sort of everyone will heal themselves if they follow me. And that stuff's bad. It's bad, and it makes it difficult to see things clearly.
Given that, how do you think about balancing? So there's these two tensions. On one hand, we want to look at the broad base of evidence, what works for most people most of the time. At the same time, I do think these sort of N of one, my own personal experience, can be useful. And in the case of kind of what you wrote about with the long COVID piece, it's like there's a lot of different things that may or may not work. This brain training stuff seems to work for at least some population of people who have long COVID. At the same time, to your point, there are snake oil salesmen. And here's this other type of evidence. So how the hell do you how do you wade through that as a human being?
What a big question.
Sorry.
I guess, so one thing I would say about the brain retraining coaching world, whatever you want to call it, is that there are some kinds of interventions, and I didn't get into this a lot in the Wired piece, but I think it's really important. There's some kinds of interventions that are just harder to test in the way that our institutions of scientific inquiry are set up than others. They're just more difficult to test. So for example, Biggest Loser, the television show, as a year-long weight loss intervention is terrific. It works great. Like, everyone who goes on Biggest Loser loses a ton of weight. Like, how do you do a randomized controlled trial of being on the Biggest Loser as a year-long weight loss intervention? You can't. What does the blinding look like? I mean, it wouldn't even make any sense. And so I think a part of what gets lost in these sorts of interventions, at the risk of bringing up something that I know you talk about, I want to stay away from this, but addiction is similar to this. So addiction is a physiological state. You become addicted to alcohol or drugs physiologically. And then it's not magic. It's not that it's not that the addiction is all in your head. It's not that the symptoms of withdrawal are all in your head. That would be absurd to say. But some people kick their addictions through a combination of community and thinking. I mean, it sounds sort of bizarre to put it that way, but that's really what happens. As some people don't. For some people, it doesn't work. Some people have to find the right community for them. Some people try 6 times to kick their addiction until they finally find at the right time in their life the community that works right for them. None of that is unscientific or woo-woo. None of that implies that if only addicts changed their minds, they would just heal, even though there are, of course, some cases of people who, after like a car accident with their kid in the back or something, just instantaneously kick their addiction. So I think that's actually, there's no perfect parallel. And when people hear addiction, they often think, well, that's caused by choices you've made as opposed to post-viral infection, which is whatever. That's not really the point in this analogy. The point is there are physiological states, really entrenched ones, that cause physiological symptoms that we know can be resolved through effortful involvement in a community and a set of beliefs that often doesn't work the first time or the second time or the third time, and often will work for one person and be deeply alienating to someone else. Again, I don't want to get into AA or anything like that, but for some people, AA is a nightmare. They hate the God talk. Yeah. They hate the higher power talk. And, it's messy. Yeah. How do you navigate that? Well, one thing I think you need to do, and this is something I think in the long COVID world is just a disaster, is when you have something dominated by biomedical science, this happens in nutrition science too, there's an endless churn of studies that come out. Strawberries this, blah, 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 that, whatever, right? There's endless nutrition. This causes cancer. This cures cancer.
Coffee saves your life one week and the next week it's nope, you're going to die from it.
Totally.